This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
I talk about the true crime news that comes to me, and a lot of it's just like press releases. It's about cases that we've either covered or something I'm really interested in. I got some that I don't know how to qualify right this second. So to place this in time, I think by the time this episode airs, this will be old news. But I was shocked, and this is brand new, just happened at the end of January for people who may know about it and haven't heard the whole thing. There's this kid in Pennsylvania, and I say kid, but he's 32 years old. His name is Justin Mohn, M-O-H-N. Have you heard of him?
I don't think so.
Okay, so here's the headline I got sent, and it's from the UK. And then I backtracked it, and I started going through everything in the US. It's interesting because everybody is pulling down what's being put up about him. Here's the bare minimum of what he did, and then I'll talk about how bonkers it is. The headline in the Daily Mail, and I know that's a terrible source. I'm just saying it because that's what I was able to pull up and it kind of cohesively put it all together. It says, Justin Mohn decapitates his father, 68, and brandishes his severed head during gruesome 14-minute-long anti-Biden YouTube rant. And then it says Justin Mohn, 32, was arrested, charged with murder in Pennsylvania, hours after posting a video online showing his father's severed head. He previously had been posting unhinged rants about a war between himself and the federal government. That's the subtitles of this article. Germania Polio and Harriet Alexander put it together with James Nye for DailyMail.com. It's interesting. It's an interesting story, so I'll run through a little bit of it. And there is some. I'm about to say some graphic things, which I know everything we cover is pretty graphic, but this is a self-proclaimed, quote, Messiah decapitated his 68-year-old father, then held up the victim's head in a politically charged YouTube video blasting the federal government and the Biden administration. And I will say he also blasts like every other administration in the course of his social media. He's in custody in Pennsylvania after his father, Michael, was found by Michael's wife beheaded inside the home that the three of them shared in the quiet Philadelphia suburb of Levittown. The alleged killer's mother called police to report she had discovered her husband's body inside the bathroom and that he had no head. Police then recovered a large kitchen knife and a machete from the bathtub after finding the man's head inside of a plastic bag which had been placed inside of a crock pot in a bedroom. Hours before his arrest, Mohn held up what he claimed was his father's head during a politically charged rant. Mohn said many saw him as the Messiah and wanted him to be president, while urging relatives living with federal employees to murder the federal employees. He blamed the federal government for woke mobs and migrants he claims are destroying the United States, and he ranted against globalists and communists. I'm pretty sure this video has been taken down. I did see the video. It is not it's not what you expect. I've seen videos like this before where somebody is doing something very dramatic and graphic. This particular video is weird because the guy's just sitting there ranting. It's something you would never really watch under normal circumstances, I don't think. It's 14 minutes long. And so the article continues. The appalling 14-minute clip, which remained on YouTube for 6 hours after it was posted before being taken down, sees Mohn hold up his father's head in a bloodied plastic bag, having declared that violence is the only solution to the federal government's treason. He says in the video, "This is the head of Mike Mohn, a federal employee of over 20 years, and my father. He is now in hell for eternity as a traitor to his country." They try to confirm if this guy is actually a federal employee. He's 68, so that's 6 years beyond the normal retirement date. They don't tell us here if they've confirmed it. And honestly, most of the articles that are popping up about this are moving pretty quickly. I was able to pull the criminal docket, and then I saw after the fact that Daily Mail had put it up. It was possession of an instrument of violence, murder in the first degree, and abuse of a corpse. There's been some press releases about this. The guy rants on social media in a couple different places about student loans, and he talks about the Bible. And I've never really understood how you can get to this point. It's honestly, and I never want to give somebody an out here, but it's honestly an extreme mental illness that's happening. The fact that it ends here is pretty terrible. Have you ever looked into someone who just has a meltdown and does something incredibly violent?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that looked into would be the right word, but yeah, I mean, I'm aware that people become sort of disillusioned. Clearly, having put it on YouTube, you have to wonder, well, if he wasn't going to hold up the head on YouTube, would he have done this to begin with, right?
Right.
And the derogatory remarks that he made, I haven't seen the video. I have no interest in seeing the video. But if he said, this is the head of my father who's now rotting in hell, clearly there's animosity there that goes beyond the political rants that he's having, right? I imagine, let's see, Justin is 32. Is that what you said?
Yeah, he's right at the late 20s is the onset of schizophrenia, so he's right there.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I just know that I have a feeling that if we were to know, this probably has something to do with his father not being real happy that he lives at home and has taken a lot of time to develop some very extreme views on things, probably from just soaking up what he sees on media as opposed to in the world, for real, and so he probably, I can see where there could be some conflict there, right? As far as he rants against everything, which is strange.
Yeah, it's strange to have this kind of rant. He takes it a step further. You want to hear more about this and see what you think of this?
Yeah, sure.
So last year in 2023, he files a lawsuit against the United States government. He sues them for negligently providing him with a student loan, which made him, quote, an overeducated white man unable to find work, end quote.
I don't think that the reason he couldn't find work is the federal government's fault.
Well, no, I mean, he's not going to have any grounds there. But this filing was made shortly before Christmas. He basically blames the government for everything that's wrong in his life. It was the fourth time that he's attempted to sue. He was seeking $10 million in damages from the federal government. So he says in the filing he was a graduate of the Pennsylvania State University's agribusiness management program. He graduated in 2014. So 10 years he's been out of school. That would make him 22-ish when he gets out of school. So he's a normal college student. According to this complaint, he started paying a student loan 6 months later, and then he couldn't find a full-time job, and he doesn't say when that was. He's sort of says he could only get part-time jobs. There's no good timeline in here. It says that he moved to Colorado and that he took a full-time job at a credit union and later with an insurance company. But according to his complaint, this is his quote, his work postgraduate years was malemployment, malemployment, no idea what that means. But he's got these social media posts, and I saw the Daily Mail and a couple of these sketchier sources that put these together. He's ranting about a civil war between him and his followers, and he calls his followers, quote, the cult. In one of these posts, he wrote, even my own family upholds the cult beliefs and is willing to go to jail to prove it. Donald Trump, if this does not get fixed ASAP, then you will also be in jail for the rest of your life after I sue you for everything you own. That's not a threat. That's a promise.
Wait, what?
I'm just telling you what he's saying.
But why would him suing Donald Trump for everything he owned result in Donald Trump going to jail?
It almost sounds like he is absorbing things he reads other people saying
And
on
just
social
spouting him back.
and he's regurgitating it from his own perspective. He has some kind of messianic complex. Like he thinks he is like a cult leader or a messiah. The minute that I started looking at everything, now I literally heard about this as the arrest was happening when the video was still up. It's gone, and that was within 6 hours of it being posted or being announced. And then I went through his Facebook and I went through his Twitter or X, whatever you call it, and on his YouTube page. Now, all that's been taken down, which is something I'm going to ask you about here in a second. But on his YouTube page, he writes that he had released an album of music called The Story of Humanity in 2017. And then he released another album in 2018. His quote is that his music style is a blend of rock, funk, and hip hop using piano and organ as primary instruments, along with explicit lyrics, drums, bass, and other synthesized instruments. It says that he also wrote conspiracy-laden manifestos on the Daily Mail's article. He wrote a book titled Poems I Wrote While Stoned, a collection of poems. He wrote another book called The Punishing, and that book was set in the year 2481, where Satan ruled the world. And the blurb from that says, after rejecting their Messiah and straying from the word of God, humanity falls under complete control of Satan and his minions, a race of artificially modified humans who no longer call themselves Homo sapiens, but rather Homo demonicus. And then he has a preview up for something called America's Coming Bloody Revolution. And its blurb reads, similar to Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in 1776, which helped inspire the American Revolution, the short, easy-to-understand pamphlet explains why another revolution is likely in America and how it could be successful.
Well, if you've got your calendar marked for that one, you might want to make sure it's in pencil.
I do not think he's going to be releasing anything else.
I have a tendency to feel like, I mean, there's no question there's mental illness happening here. Like, no question. I wonder how much of it is like organic versus the type of life he lived versus like somebody at some point in time not giving him a reality check. And because, I don't know what to say about this guy. I think that anybody that cuts anybody's head off, much less their father's head, is got a mental illness, a severe mental illness, okay, of some sort. I don't really know what it would be, but that's a gruesome way to either mutilate the body or to kill someone, right?
Yeah.
To do it to your own father, that's a whole nother level. I feel like this is sort of like I've talked about before, something like a toddler would do.
I kind of want to agree with you, and I do to a degree. But listen to this for a second. So I went on because I'm nosy as hell. I went on, and I think they're going to pull these down too. I went on and found where the filings. This guy was filing in the district court in 2021 and 2022. It made its way all the way to the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit.
What?
Like his rantings. So he's pro se, and he's filing
about his college education, his
loans
or whatever. You realize his parents paid those loans, right?
Oh, I figured that's what was happening.
Like it's not even an issue.
Well, so he brings an action under the FTCA, which is the Federal Tort Claims Act. And the district court kicks it, but it makes it all the way to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And I bring that up, and you might be able to find it on one of those law sites now. By the time this airs, I'm pretty sure that'll be pulled down too, which I'm coming to a question on that, I swear. Reading it, the reason I bring it up is because if he's pro se, clearly going through the filing process with the clerk, going through the district court, appealing to a superior court, bumping it out and appealing to the federal court, whatever he's doing, because and I haven't looked at the whole chain of what's happened here. I just looked at like one of the judgments. I'm just going to say, like, there's a lot of people that should have had eyes on this kid.
Yeah, I don't think that link was made, for sure. I feel like that's interesting you say that, because honestly, again, whoever in the normal course of life would have reality checked this kid, 20 years ago, didn't. And that, planted a seed that should have been, that was a weed that should have been, tossed out. I don't know if that makes sense or not. But, what he is saying it's ludicrous. He's clearly not a messiah. I can see, I'm not exactly sure if he's at war against his followers or with his followers.
I'm not even entirely sure who his followers are.
I'm pretty sure it's nobody.
Well, no, I mean, I know that, but I mean, say we're qualifying the fictional followers. They seem to be everybody, but they're also his enemies.
Well, and that's where you just go, oh, you've got problems. And I have a feeling that his dad was probably trying to deal with the situation. And man, I wonder how. I always imagine in situations like this that Mike Mon wouldn't have had any idea that his son could actually physically be dangerous. Having some proclivities, parents can overlook a whole lot and love their children unconditionally, right? And as long as you feel like no harm will come to them, or that you don't feel like they'll harm anyone else, you can overlook a lot of things just to sort of keep, especially since he's a grown man living in his parents' house with them. If I had to guess, and I don't have to guess, but I'm putting myself in the position to kind of want to answer the question why. I think that it's entirely possible this kid is on some sort of drug.
I was going to ask you about that. Okay, so I have a couple of questions here. I don't know where they're putting these court records, but they're sequestering them somewhere, and I was pulling what I could. Like, I literally refreshed his Facebook page because it got stuck in a post, and it did not come back up. And at first I thought it was because maybe a lot of people are looking or whatever, but then it never came back up.
Somebody might have taken it down.
I think that Facebook took it down. I think that YouTube took down his post, and I think that X deleted, or Twitter or whatever, deleted his account. That's
interesting, because I can see why YouTube would have taken down the video with the severed head, because that would certainly be alarming and against their terms of use.
So I noticed when I was doing all of that he became his own footnote in his cases. Like, he was becoming his own precedent. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, again, that means that you're getting nowhere at all.
Right. So, like, one of the filings I pulled that I was able to, like, go through basically said that he was filing for the fourth time or something, and they use, times 1, 2, and 3 as the precedent for not continuing.
Well, right, because you can appeal things, but, like, adjudication, especially in civil matters, it's not endless. Right? Like, you can't just keep doing it until, like, maybe someday somebody will rule in your favor. Like that, you can't do that. And, obviously he's not an attorney, so they're not going to sanction him probably, but it's not a situation where you can just keep filing until you get the answer you want, right?
Yeah, and they point that out too.
Well, sure, and because it's a waste. I mean, everyone has the right to access, our judicial system from a civil standpoint if you feel like you've been wronged and you're looking to find a remedy for it. Doing it over and over again, though, is fruitless. And it doesn't even sound to me like he had I don't know. It's hard for me to get my head around somebody who's like, well, you gave me an education. Now I can't find a job, so pay me money. Like, that's just a weird way to think. But it's also the way that I imagine that his parents probably gave him everything. They paid for him to go to college. When he couldn't get a job, he's not homeless. He's living probably in a pretty nice house with his parents, right? And I think that molds a mindset, right? And it sort of goes along with like, and I can't say that like, my life, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with this unless you end up like holding your dad's head on your YouTube video, right?
Right.
That's where you kind of go, oh, so he never realized that like, oh, your dad's telling you to get off the computer and get a job. So he's actually got a point and you don't just like, machete his head off.
There's so many things about that. Okay. I'll ask you this in a way that like, I don't want the details of it, but just generally speaking, you've been through appellate courts, and if I remember correctly, you've done something all the way up to the Supreme Court, right? As far as the paperwork and the filing and
yes.
Like, okay, so when you do that, I have two. I've been attached to something going all the way up there through all the appellate process, and then I've had something that was like heavily litigated that I was attached to the last phases of, and then I caught it on the second round as well that I was trying to help someone do. It's a complex process to put together a federal appellate court filing.
Well, it is, but you could also just handwrite a note and
it would have the same effect
of getting dismissed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm like. I'm trying. Like, what I'm seeing is
you can't not to like. I mean, no, the United States Supreme Court is very strict. It has to be. There's actually companies out there that do nothing but print in the format required for the United States Supreme Court. But all that is just it's layout, format, printing, right?
Yeah.
But as far as like these district federal courts that he was, sending his cases to, I mean, he made a CD or an album, and that lends me to think that he has a computer, right?
Correct.
He more than likely typed it, and so a couple pieces of paper. I don't know how coherent it was, being able to. It definitely suggests that he had a level of organization that you wouldn't expect a crazy person to have. That's what you're sort of getting at, right?
Yeah, and to be clear to the audience, I'm not making fun of this person. I find the situation to be tragic.
I feel like it goes hand in hand that you would have a young man who the fourth time the federal district court dismissed his case for $10 million against the United States government because they gave him an education and he can't find a job, would then be standing on YouTube holding his father's head.
I mean, there's something.
None of that is like a real problem. Like he could get a job. It's just not the job he wants, right?
It's almost like this sounds like I don't want to sound like I'm supporting him or dismissing him or his family
You
or
shouldn't cut your father's head off.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the PSA of today. As terrible as I can't believe we have to say that. I sat down and looked at all of this, and one, I actually tried to go on and see if like I could find any of his books, and those were also being pulled down. And they were like Amazon publishing situations. I wanted to see how coherent he was, but I did find his Goodreads list. Do you know what Goodreads is?
Yeah, it's where you put the books that you want to read or that you've read and you rate them or whatever.
Yeah, so he has 10 distinct works on Goodreads.
Mm-hmm.
The first one says they will burn this book. Second one is The Revolution Leader's Survival Guide, How Schools, Workplaces, and Social Norms Kill the Genius Inside All of Us. Then there's Poems I Wrote While Stoned, a collection of poems. And then he's got this, The Kingdom of Darkness. There's a second listing for the Kingdom of Darkness. And then there's The Second Messiah, King of Earth. Then there's Dark Ages of the Future, a collection of short stories. It has 2 entries. Then there's something called The Pink and something called The
Are
Punisher.
these his books?
These are things he wrote.
Interesting. I didn't realize Goodreads was like about what you wrote.
No, it's usually not. This is his quote author page. Like this is pulled from his Amazon listing, which went down in the middle of me trying to tell you about it. The Amazon listing went down, so I can't read any of these books anymore, but I can give you some of the descriptions of them. And like I thought that was interesting. Like some of these books are 300 and some pages long.
Okay, and so what are you thinking?
This guy was telegraphing that something was not well.
Right, and so, you know, if you see somebody like that, what do you do? Well, because sort of get away from the person. I'm not looking to intervene. And so my guess is that's probably why his dad ended up, you know, in the situation that he was in was because he was trying to do something to stop his son or to talk some sense into him or whatever.
I don't know what you do. Like if I came along somebody, my instincts would be to get away from him.
Right, exactly, which is what I would do. I mean, and I feel like that's probably what everybody did, right? I feel like this type of behavior could be caused from drug use as like before being an adult. I think that messes with your brain, or chronic use now as an adult, and just sort of to the point where it altered his state of mind. And I would actually say drug use over even like mental illness, because I don't know that mentally ill people default to like rageful rants for the most part, right?
So he's definitely into at least marijuana.
I don't know that marijuana could do something like that.
I looked at it and I was like, the first thing I thought, and this is terrible, is I wonder if he was on some psychotropic medication where they had tried to get him help, and this was the result.
He was regulating the medication himself, taking it and then stopping it and then taking it and stopping it, because that can really mess you up.
That's sort of what I thought.
The other thing is he could just have like a really bad reaction. But the thing is, that list of, literature that you read off, that indicates to me that that it would have been going on for a really long time. Like this wasn't a surprise side effect.
Yeah, no, these books are being published for years. Like one of them was, I think, 2014 or 15. He's definitely coherent enough to at least write the descriptions of the book. Like I said, I can't get my hands on the books anymore. And some of the descriptions indicate, I think one of them was January 2016. And I read it and I went, oh, he was able to coherently write that. But then at the end of it, I went back and I reread it for context. And I went, wait a second. I don't think he's all there. And I was going to mention that here before we move back to like the topic of the day. They Will Burn This Book. It had a date of January 19, 2016. And this is sort of what he's saying there. The dystopian novel heir to the throne of classics such as Brave New World, 1984, and Fahrenheit 451. Song lyrics included in storyline. After World War II, Canada, America, and Mexico organized under one government, the NWC, or the Northwest Continent. As the superpower of the world, the NWC upheld a crucial role in the Order of Continents, a global peacekeeping organization which set the NWC currency, the NWC note, as the reserve currency of the world. Eventually, the power of NWC's military and capitalist economy revealed corruption and greed after decades of consolidation in every industry aided by global war racketeering for business interests. And I'm going to pause there. He goes on for 8 paragraphs like this as the describer of this book, like the blurb. And I realized this guy has been unwell for a very, very long time. So if he's 32 today, that's 8 years ago. He would have been in his 23, 24 years old. I don't think his problem getting hired was his whiteness or his overeducation.
No, yeah. I would say that anywhere, if you demand to be treated as, a messiah, is that what he said? Messiah?
Yeah, he said it was a messiah.
I feel like you're going to be really disappointed with any job that you get.
Yeah. And there's part of me that thinks, did he just slowly melt down and no one really, like some people are like kind of together enough that you don't see it on the outside. And like some of the stuff he's saying, like, by the way, all of these books are sort of autobiographical. He's describing himself as the lead characters. And some people can't differentiate between the thoughts it's okay to have and the actions it's okay to take. For whatever reason. I don't know if this is mental illness or drug use now that I read through all of it, but whatever it is fascinating.
I feel like this is a DIY, meth-like experiment gone really, really wrong.
You think he's cooking his own stuff?
Like something, right?
Okay.
Whether it's altering, because, the guy is smart, okay? While he's too smart for his own good, clearly. Just even the way he's phrasing things, he's got some grasp on things, right? The issue is, there's a fine line between genius and insanity, right? But my point in saying that is somebody that can, write all these manifesto-like books could certainly tweak a recipe for some sort of homemade, meth, some sort of variation of it. I don't know. But I feel like it takes a certain alteration to a normal human mind. I don't know. There's probably a wide variety of things that could cause it. I guess even pot could do it in certain circumstances, but I feel like marijuana is unlikely to. Maybe the paranoid. I don't know. I feel like this is more of some sort of like chemical experiment gone awry, probably for a really long time, and then damage that's been done over time, and then sort of like the fallout from that. Have you ever met as we're getting older, do you ever come across somebody that you've known like your whole life or a long time, and you can see the effects that like the stuff they've done have had on them?
Yeah.
Right. Like if like you can tell like, oh, the burnout like is really burnout now, right? And because you've been around them, that they're very slow because they drank a lot or they smoked a lot of weed, and so now they're kind of in this like semi-permanently stoned state. And so to me,
ouch,
it's do you know what I mean though?
Yeah.
And to me, this is like somebody who is in a like meth like fueled rage all the time.
Well, yeah, but so I don't typically see it in people that are 24 to 32 years old.
I think that it would take quite a bit, or some sort of like, because I imagine he doesn't have money, because even if your parents are like really well off, they don't like giving their 30 something year old kid money, right? Especially when you live at their house. I assume he eats their food and consumes their electricity, and so they're not going to give him money to buy drugs, right?
Yeah.
And so somebody that's well educated. I mean, that's what he said, right? That he was well educated. You could come up with some things that you might think were a good idea to try and get high off of.
Instead of starting a business or like getting a new job.
Well, addiction is different, right? It's something that can lead you to do crazy things. I would love to know what I feel sorry for his dad, and his mom, actually. And I have a feeling that his dad probably tolerated a lot of abuse from him.
Yeah.
And it probably never even occurred to him that this was going to happen. Or if it did, he was trying to work against it happening. And I can even imagine, like, because there's pictures everywhere. I can even imagine his dad being like, well, at least now he's not going to hurt anybody else, right? Like the martyr.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, right? When you have children, you never know what you're going to get, right? You really don't. You have no idea. And there's a wide variety of elements that you cannot control, even if you're the most controlling parent, which can actually backfire in some ways.
Well, I've started to see more and more of these. There was a North Carolina shooting. A guy was allegedly a former Army captain and killed a couple of people. And then I noticed that his landlord was suing him, saying he was lying about being an Army captain. But he had been ranting against Biden and student loans and like affirmative action, similar to this guy. It's an interesting phenomenon. And I sort of brought this up as our true crime news today because we were talking about the I-70 killer. And one of the things I noticed in all the readings that I've done for the I-70 killer is that, one, he was described as wearing, I don't know if you saw this, he was described as wearing a sports coat and slacks with a tie. And in two of the scenes, he was described as talking to himself. He went into this, I think it was the second scene, he goes into like another location, and like the owner of that other location saw him ahead of the murder. And that's why we have the descriptions that we have, because there's all these different witnesses. But he described him as like standing in the corner talking to himself. And I had a really good, in my opinion, suspect for all of this that had like a head injury. And I don't know where I turned that into the police and I gave my reasoning behind it, but it's not something that we can really go deep in on here because it's a strange situation for that guy. I might bring it up as we wrap all of this up, but I always wonder like where my world, I understand to a degree the motivations of certain serial killers. Like I understand what they were doing. I understand what they were embarrassed by. I understand what like their justification and their minimization was, but I also understand like what they were really doing in hindsight. Because you and I have studied so many of these people at this point, researched so many of them. We have a really good idea of like the differences between, like the sexual sadist killer or predator versus like the I-70 killer. He's not a strangler. He's not a rapist. He's going in and like shooting these people. These killers are very difficult for me to understand their motivation.
I think there is there has to be some sort of motivation. It isn't readily apparent, though, to me anyway, because they are pretty much senseless, right?
They appear to be, yeah.
Not that all murders aren't senseless. I mean, I would say like all murders are senseless. It could be worked out a different way, clearly, but you have the type of murderer that, like you said, a sexual sadist. They go in, they have that motive, right? It's really hard to figure out why somebody would go somewhere they have no reason to be, where people that work there are, and kill them without attacking them physically, without any sort, like, because he shot them execution style. Most of the time, you think about executions and it's a punishment, right? For it's a direct punishment, style of killing someone. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for like a stranger to go in and shoot somebody, not take anything, and not have any sort of personal, not have any of the classic motivation to do it. What are they doing? Well, I imagine there's an underlying connection that could be made. Or I think that it's possible that there's a thrill, a little bit of a thrill of the like going in, shooting, and leaving, sort of like I imagine what people get now, like, when they play a game.
Or use a drug.
Yeah, maybe. To me, though, I'm not really sure that I'm ever going to be able to make that distinction, because to kill just to kill, like, I feel like most of the time those are stranglings, right?
Yeah, or something intimate, something up close and personal. So yeah,
Because because serial killers want to feel that's what they're doing, and like shooting somebody with a gun is not going to give them that. But I can possibly imagine that there's some sort of rush associated with going in, shooting someone, and then leaving. But I don't see that as like other types of serial killers.
and see, that's exactly kind of the path that I'm headed down today. So there's this weird thing that happens with these I-70 killings. Where we left off was 1992, and that was with May 7th, the murder of this woman, Sarah Blessing. So we were talking about that, but there's another like sort of layer to this where we're kind of told by the mainstream media much later. Like this is, I think, 2012. This started becoming like a thing. I remember reading articles about it over time, but the idea was that this series of murders that happened down in Texas might be related to it. And so these are from 1993. And if you go on, the sources for this, by the way, are Bob Cyphers again. The St. Louis Dispatch has a couple of articles. I want to say the Indianapolis Star is mostly Bob Cyphers' work. He had a couple of articles that mention what I'm about to talk about. In 1993, all the way up to 1994, there are a series of murders that start happening later in the year that kind of look like the I-70 killer. I have not seen exactly why, but I can speculate a little bit. So where we left off, and you pointed this out to me, and I thought it was a pretty good like understanding. He's choosing some interesting stores. He hits a Payless shoe store. He hits a bridal shop, which is wedding supplies, typically dresses and tuxedos, formal wear. And I did read, I think I had said I thought they were going to prom. A later source says that it was a guy that was going to a wedding. He hits a ceramic shop. That's Sylvia's ceramic store in Terre Haute. That's the April murder of Mick McCown. And then Nancy Kitzmiller, she gets killed in basically a shoe store, a boot store, the Boot Village in St. Charles, Missouri. And then we have Sarah Blessing. She gets killed in this like sort of alternative gift shop, the Store of Many Colors, and that's over in Raytown, Missouri. That's the last confirmed I-70 murder, and that's May 7th, 1992.
And essentially the only thing that links these is the timing, right? It's within, I think, 29 days, all of these murders occur. And
It's 29 days, yeah.
the way that it occurred, which is essentially a clerk in a store killed execution style.
Right. There's one more element that we're going to get to here in just a second. We kind of touched on it already, but we're going to bring it up. The 1993 murders, they start off with there's a woman killed in an antique store on September 25th of 1993 in Fort Worth in the Emporium Antique Store. Now, this is a 51-year-old woman named Mary Ann Glasscock. Then on November the 1st in Arlington, in a dance apparel store, which I picture as being like at that time, it would have been like aerobics wear and like the leotards and the things that like people wear when they're like doing fitness and dance, but I don't know 100% that that's the case. There's a 22-year-old woman named Amy Vess, and she gets shot to death there. There's a survivor, January 15th, 1994, in Houston at a place that's literally called the Alternatives Gift Shop. That's 35-year-old Vicki Webb. She talked to the shooter, and he ends up shooting her in the back of the head, but the bullet misses her. The bullet hits a vertebrae, and it doesn't penetrate her skull. And when the shooter goes to shoot her again, the gun misfires. She, from all accounts, either appears to be dead or pretends to be dead. He presumes he's done and he leaves. And they sort of announce, and Bob Cypher's the one that's running a lot of this down. They sort of announce that there's a possibility of things being linked. There's a similar MO. This seems to be a .22 caliber firearm, but ballistics tests later confirm that the gun that was used in the Texas murders is not the exact same gun that was used in the I-70 killings. So there's no way to like confirm for sure that these are part of the same like killer's work, I guess, or killer's crimes. And there's one more crime. The additional crime, it takes place in November of 2001. And that's with the murder of a 31-year-old liquor store clerk in Terre Haute, Indiana. In November of 2021, so 20 years later, the Terre Haute police, they say that the I-70 killer is a possible suspect in this crime. Billy Brossman was working alone at the 7th and 70 liquor store in Terre Haute, and there's security camera footage of this. Have you seen the footage?
I have, yeah.
So it shows a white male suspect enter the store. He pulls a gun on Brossman and he robs the cash register. The footage then shows the suspect lead Brossman to the back of the store and he shoots him with a single shot to the back of the head. Now, the murder of Billy Brossman, it occurs about 7 blocks away from Sylvia Ceramics, which is where Mick McCown was killed. So it's similar to the I-70 murders, but there is security footage. He actually talks to the camera. The killer talks to the camera. He's not covered up or anything. And police have stated they have a person of interest in that case, but they've never made an arrest there.
Okay, so I've seen the footage of like when he comes in, he brandishes the gun, and then he has the guy, Billy walk around and walk to the back of the store. I have not seen him talking to the camera.
So that's from a source that's actually going to come up in the next episode. So I think we'll leave it there for the moment.
Okay, that's fine.
Because there's, and I guess like while we're talking about this, we're going to cover a couple other things. But so in the next episode, we're going to talk to Bob Cyphers. And Bob Cyphers literally wrote the book on this case. And he wrote there's a lot of journalism involved in this case. And while you and I were working on the I-70 Strangler case, Bob ended up talking to us. He reached out and said, hey, there's a book coming out. We already knew we were going to be moving from the Strangler to the I-70 Killer, but he reached out and said, hey, would you and Meg want to chat about this? And he sent us a very nice message. And I decided that my instincts on going with the I-70 killer were correct. And so we went from the Strangler to the killer. He reached out to us like while we were finishing up our work on I-70 Strangler. So we're going to have an opportunity to talk to him next week. And we'll get his opinion on some of this. One of the things that was interesting here related to the I-70 killer is sort of like, how do they link all these together?
My guess is the timing.
That was originally my thought, and I will go ahead and say that in the book, some of the investigators related to this case feel like there was a serious mistake made early on. And while we'll get into that when we talk to Bob, I'm just going to run down a couple of the things that like sort of the cliff notes of this, and I'm going to talk about sort of a criminal that gets lumped in with this guy. We'll talk about him for just a few minutes. Okay, this is what you would get like in the Cliff Notes version of this. The murders are linked after St. Charles looks at it, like one of their detectives looks at this and he thinks that it's all the same gun. They go into this thing where like the victims are all these like petite young women with long dark hair, but you know, you've got the double murders, that doesn't necessarily apply. You got Mike McCowan, that doesn't necessarily apply. Mick McCowan, sorry. You got the fact that they're all alone. They were all shot in the back of the head. None of the scenes had any signs of any type of sexual abuse. All the stores are robbed, but only of a small amount of money. All these stores are, like you had pointed out, they're small businesses. Like there's not a lot in the cash register. And even, I mean, I worked a register shortly after this time. It was a time when at least my store was a little more corporate than I worked in, but you put big bills in a drop box. You didn't keep mini 20s, no 50s, no 100s in the
Robbery
top drawer.
definitely wasn't the motive.
Right. So they're saying that like it happened, and the fact that it's secondary in all of these is interesting. The murders took place at times of day when the stores were either closing or significantly slower than they might have been. Several of them were in strip malls that seemed to sort of relate to I-70. Now, based on what police were told in the different cases, they narrowed it down to either being an Intratec Scorpion 22 pistol or an Irma Work EQ 22 pistol. So they haven't ruled out a lot of other 22 caliber firearms, but this is based on the fact that a couple of people saw this gun. The ammunition that was used in each of these killings was 22 caliber CCI copper-clad lead bullets. CCI is a manufacturer out of Lewiston, Idaho. So the bullets are all kind of the same. Now, the casings of the cartridges, which are left at the scene, this guy did not police his brass. They all had iron or ferric oxide on them that the investigators believe came from jeweler's rouge. You know what jeweler's rouge is?
Yeah.
Like the polishing stuff?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So
they had to have seen that as like some. So, okay, I don't know a whole lot about this. Is that a defining characteristic?
I mean, polishing this way, I don't know. Like it could be some guy that's reloading his ammo. If he's reloading his ammo and he's polishing up the casings because they're reuse, maybe. I don't.
Yeah, but does somebody that reuses their casings leave them at the scene?
In my opinion, no, but we don't know how many they have. We just know they have some of them.
I don't know if that type of ammo, like if you just did, a random
sampling
of it, does it all have it on it, right? For whatever reason, it could be a variety of things, or is it from a specific person using specific ammo in a specific gun that leads them all to it being linked? I don't know enough about that to say like, oh yeah, that means that they all did it, right? I've never heard anybody say, I've heard them say that there was Jeweler's Rouge found and that they linked it that way. I've never heard anybody say like, oh, it would be really strange for these casings to both have Jeweler's Rouge on them.
I don't have enough experience with using Jeweler's Rouge to polish like the polished brass to know what that would mean. I can tell you that like this is strange. I actually saw a box of CCI ammo recently at someone's house who has a 22 rifle, and I was like, huh. I don't know that it's the exact same. This is not scientific at all. I'm just saying, kind of on the side. Clearly, it's common if I was able to see it just sitting like in a gun case.
Well, right. And to me, I'm going, well, what if the manufacturer uses that like as one of the last steps of the process or something?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
Because to me, like the only person that would use Jeweler's Rouge on bullets would be the manufacturer, right?
I think it's just a little strange that it all happens in the 29 days and they're identifying it all being the same type ammunition.
I mean, yeah, I guess, unless you tell me like, you know, there's two types of 22 ammunition, right? Like total.
Right. I understand what you're saying.
And then it becomes like less of an anomaly, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know enough about that kind of stuff. I looked for someone who was investigating it at the time to go beyond like just saying, oh yeah, they both had the same thing. And like I looked for them to say, and we went back and, you know, we found out that that was uncommon, that unless it had been handled by the same person in the same gun, they wouldn't have that.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of end up in the same boat as you. Like, I have some confusion. I'm hoping we can bring Bob in here and clear that up. That's what I think. Don't you think that maybe we'll get some more answers? He had some interesting tidbits in his book, which I know.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Because I feel like he knows quite a bit more about it. Mm-hmm.
So I wanted. Well, this is kind of weird to do, but I took a look at another investigation. We got some time today in Indiana, kind of related to Indiana, that took place kind of right ahead of this. Now, when he comes on, we'll talk about some different suspects. But I just wanted to talk about this one interesting spree killer, I guess. He's a serial killer, according to like what you'll read about him, but it wasn't known for a really long time. And it kind of happens in a way that like, it's not going to be the same guy, but like from the perspective of like what was going on in place and time, this is happening like right ahead of that. Have you ever heard of the killer I'm about to mention before, by the way?
No. Mm-mm.
He was one that, I first come up with this guy, looking at him like, could he possibly be the I-70 killer back in 2021? And I didn't get really far with him because, in my opinion, the motives are too different. But this is one of those killers that's fascinating to me. And I know we're kind of like wandering on time. So if people want to check out now, I'm not really going to mention any more about the I-70 killer. You can come back next episode. I'm going to talk about somebody completely different. This guy's name is Harry Edward Greenwell. And he was born in December of 1944. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky. We don't know a whole lot about him, but we know that in 1963, he gets arrested for an armed robbery in Louisville, and he gets a little prison time. He basically ends up getting 2 years in the reformatory, and then he gets 5 years of probation. Probation in 1963 would have been a little different than like what we experience today. He gets hit in February of 1965 after the armed robbery charges. He gets hit with a sodomy charge in Jefferson County, Kentucky. And so that sends him back to prison. He stays in prison until 1969, and he gets out of the Kentucky State Penitentiary. He gets married, Everything seems to be pretty normal in his life for a few years as far as records of him go. But on April 28th of 1978, Harry's wife dies in a house fire up in Vernon County, Wisconsin. Shortly after this happens in April of 1978, he meets a 39-year-old single mother who had been in some kind of abusive relationship. Okay. So this guy is a little younger. He's 33 when he meets this woman. After a period of time, Harry Greenwell marries this woman and he adopts her son from the previous relationship. And then they have a kid together. So he's got 2 kids. In 1982, Harry gets arrested again for a burglary in Iowa. So that's just a couple years after his wife dies. It's 4 years after his wife dies, and he's remarried and they've had a kid. He ends up having to go to Anamosa State Penitentiary. So Anamosa is in Jones County, Iowa, which is probably 20 minutes outside of Cedar Rapids. And then he has to, because of all this happening the way that it's happened, Kentucky brings him back to the reformatory, and they keep him in jail there. So he's basically got to serve the tail end of his, quote, parole probation. He gets released in 1983, and he ends up working for the railroad. And I didn't find a specific thing that he did for the railroad, but I found a reference to him in Sheila Flynn's article from 2022. So a couple of months after I heard about him, she's writing about him because the police are going to tag him for a series of crimes. Here's where that sort of starts. February 21st of 1987, Harry Greenwell sexually assaults and shoots a 41-year-old woman named Vicky Heath at a Super 8 motel in Elizabethton, Kentucky. This was not a low-key thing. He goes in, they have a fight in the motel lobby. She tries to call for help. He rips the phone out of the wall, like the heavy payphone out of the wall. And they basically, they end up destroying the lobby of the Super 8 motel. And her body is found later on behind the dumpster. I don't know if it's at the hotel or if it's nearby. I couldn't find a great source on it. And this is all, this is information. They close this case out and they don't really talk about it again. May 3rd of 1989, so 2 years later, Harry, along the I-65 corridor, ends up killing 24-year-old Margaret Mary Gill, who goes by Peggy. So she works at the Maryville, Indiana Days Inn. She has been sexually assaulted and she's shot twice in the head, and her body gets dumped in a back hallway. He took $179 out of the motel register that night. And then 4 hours later, he drives to Remington, Indiana, also a Days Inn. He sexually assaults and shoots 34-year-old Jean Gilbert, who works part-time as a night clerk. Her body is found near the roadway the following morning by a passing motorist, and $247 was taken from the till at the Remington, Indiana Days Inn. So the gun that had been used to shoot and kill both women was the same .22 caliber handgun. He's killed these 2 women. There's a little bit of robbery going on here. And then as far as we know, he kind of lays low. But at this point in time, he starts to be known as the Days Inn killer or the I-65 killer because they're able to tell these bullets appear to come from the same handgun. Now, I have the same questions about this, like as far as the ballistics go. I have the same questions about this that I have about the I-70 killer. Well, January 2nd of 1990, he attacks a 21-year-old hotel clerk in Columbus, Indiana, at a Days Inn. That victim, she's working the night shift as a clerk. She survives, even though Harry sexually assaults her. He stabs her, and then he robs her. She was able to describe her attacker, and this is where we get a composite sketch from this time. Now, there's DNA at this scene. We're never really told exactly what it is, but there's DNA here that will later start to link these attacks together. So that's 1987, 1989, 1990, 4 bodies. And 2 of those bodies happened in basically the same night. In 1991, he is in Rochester, Minnesota. He sexually assaults a woman and he stabs her. She survives, and she gives a very similar description of the assailant. And she's able to give the police some details about what he was wearing, which included a flannel shirt and a pair of blue jeans. She also tells the police that he has a lazy eye. It's going to take a while, but eventually all these cases are going to be linked together. Now, this 1991 attack up in Minnesota, it's actually the only known attack that occurred along what's known as Interstate 90.
With regard to this time and space.
This time and space. Yeah. And this killer, or allegedly this killer. So Interstate 90 is the longest highway in the U.S., I think. It's about 3,000 miles long.
Right. There's probably been other attacks. It just doesn't have anything to do with this.
Right. These murders are a cold case. And in 2008, the Kentucky State Police and the ISP in Indiana, they start taking a look at DNA evidence from all of this. In 2010, the Kentucky State Police announced that DNA evidence links 3 of these crimes, and they're officially dealing with a serial killer. Why that's coming from Kentucky, I couldn't tell you. But it's all tied back to Elizabethtown.
I imagine that because of the timing, they probably... I think that Kentucky just happened to be the ones to be like, oh yeah, they match, because all this stuff is backlogged to be submitted later because CODIS didn't exist in the 80s when these were happening, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that they just happened. I don't necessarily think that... I think everybody was working on it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, they use somehow they coordinate enough that they get the DNA to match on at least 4 cases. They say that multiple states were involved. So these attacks all, for the most part, take place between January and March. And the Elizabethton police in Kentucky, they believe that the killer is some kind of seasonal worker who's got a pass-through happening where at this time of year he's there. And they suspect he's a truck driver or a traveling salesman, and they pin his age down to 55 to 65.
Were they thinking then or at the time of the murders, I wonder, for his age? What I was going to...
I don't know what made them do that.
Yeah. But I just wasn't sure if they were aging him forward, because this would be, 20 years later or whatever.
Oh, you mean when they were making the announcement? I see what you're saying.
Like they think that he's now 55 and 65, because I wouldn't pen that on. They did have eyewitness accounts, right? So this is an example of CODIS bringing evidence being entered into CODIS after after labs have found DNA profiles. And so you've got these unidentified DNA profiles all matching, connecting cases together, but you have no idea who it is, right?
Yeah.
This is a good example of that.
Yeah, this is, and this doesn't appear to really be federal at this point. Like in 2010, when they make this announcement, it's sort of the state police from a couple jurisdictions and some local police that are all talking. So here's my guess. And I might be wrong on this. I think, and just, in case you guys need it, pure speculation on my part. I think the reason they tagged the 55 to 65 is I think there's something about the crime scene that changed where they went, he's not functioning sexually. He can't get it up anymore because he starts stabbing.
Don't you think it could just come from the woman that survived?
It could. It absolutely, and there's 2 of them. It absolutely could come from their description of him. Yes.
That would be my guess, but I think they aged him forward, because I don't think that it makes sense.
Well, all of the ages are wrong. He would not have been 55 to 65
Well,
at
he
the
was
time of the crime.
68 when he died.
Right. But he would, well, if you're saying 55 to 65 in 2010, yeah, that would be close.
I just think with 2 victims, like, because that's a 10-year span, I
Right.
could take a pretty good guess at somebody that I saw had a lazy eye and was wearing a flannel shirt. I could pin their age within 10 years, probably.
Okay. I would buy that. Like, I see what you're saying. You're saying that's the range that comes out of the descriptions. I would buy
I
that.
think that when she was interviewed in 1991, I think she would have said,
He was like in his 30s or 40s.
yeah, 35 to 45.
Yeah. I got you. So his DNA gets run through for genetic testing.
It's actually a family member.
Yeah. Well, okay. The unknown DNA gets run through for genetic testing, and they identify a DNA match with a close family member of Harry Greenwell. So the testing done by Indiana State Police, it returns back with one of these probabilities that's like 99.9999999%. And they end up officially announcing his identification on April 5th of 2022 after we've been hearing about it, like it's going to be solved. They're going to tell us about it. I think that started in mid 2021. And then they announced it officially in April 2022. And they also say in the press release that they put out there that there was a strong probability that Harry Greenwell was attached to other violent crimes across the Midwest. You already said this, so I won't bury the lead. Harry Greenwell dies in Iowa in 2013. So all of this stuff that we're talking about is taking place mostly after the fact. He's not identified outright as the perpetrator of any of these assaults, attempted murders until 2022. But he had been in court in 1989 for a traffic violation. There was a domestic incident in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He had been arrested for violating a restraining order, and he got 15 months probation in April of 1989. And then he ended up getting arrested for a felony possession of drugs in Iowa in October of 1998. In February of 2010, he officially retired from his position with the Canadian Pacific Railway. And according to these articles and everything that sort of merges together on Wikipedia, he just lived in a small town where he was kind. People called him generous. He had a bunch of hobbies. He was a gardener. He would be at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. And he was very interested in horse racing, and he was very interested in sports. But he died. I brought up the sex thing where I was speculating for a minute because I wondered if this guy might be linked to something. Like if he goes from shooting these women and raping them to then stabbing them and is unable to continue assaulting them, could he, like after that 1991 incident in Minnesota, graduate to something like the I-70 killings? Ultimately, I think he's going to be ruled out because I believe, and we'll talk more with Bob about this, as we don't have a lot of info on it yet, depending on when this airs. I believe they're about to identify the I-70 killer based on DNA. But I thought this guy had been on my list as one of the more interesting suspects.
So if they're about to identify him based on DNA, that means he's dead.
That's what I think.
Yeah, because they wouldn't identify him. They would take him. They would charge him, right?
Right. If they're, well, I mean, so in exchanging messages with people like sources on I-70 killer cases, not the strangler cases, like the last couple of weeks, they've said there's been some heavy police activity on it. I don't know what that means, but I will say that both of the people I've talked to about this are pretty credible. And I just thought it might be good timing on our part to be running this series kind of behind the I-70 Strangler if they end up identifying him. But I brought up Harry Greenwell because nobody talks about him at all.
I'm sorry. Who are they going to identify? The strangler or the killer?
The I-70 killer.
Killer. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think anybody's working on the I-70 Strangler case. The I-70 killer.
Yeah, so that I'm not surprised to hear that. I don't think there's anybody working on it either. So what do you think about, in this case we have Harry Greenwell. First of all, he died in 2013 at the age of 68. He had done a little bit of time for non-violent. Well, actually, I don't know if there was any violence involved, but it was like a burglary or robbery, right?
And sodomy too. So I
Oh,
don't
he
know.
did. He was charged with that.
I don't know exactly what it was because the court records are vague. But
Okay.
yeah, he was 68 when he died. He died January 31st of 2013.
Okay, and so he lived his entire life getting away with all of those crimes, and just to be outed 5 years later.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, so first of all, I'm good with that type of DNA evidence. I trust, which may be a little naive on my part, and I may not always do that, but I trust that they have a pretty good reason for believing the DNA that they've put into CODIS was in fact the perpetrator's DNA, right? And the fact that it matches up with these otherwise unrelated crimes, right? It's a pretty good indication that you've got something solid there, right? I think, because they didn't pluck this guy from obscurity, right? It led, first of all, they had evidence from different crime scenes that ends up matching, and then at some point, a cold case unit, I assume, is working on it, and they put it through genealogy, and they find who it is, right? And so, how do you feel about that as far as like pegging him as a killer?
Well,
because these people don't get the opportunity to have a jury trial, right?
Correct.
Or for their crimes to be adjudicated at all. But you can clearly see that this guy's the I-65 killer, right? That's what they've named him.
Well, so here's what it says for his obituary. It says Greenwell, Harry Edwards, 68, of New Albin, Iowa, passed away January 31st, 2013 in Lansing, Iowa. Harry, a man with many friends who loved his straight-up attitude and his willingness to help anyone, his spirit will live on in many by good deeds that he offered. As an employee of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, providing public safety for 30 years, he retired February 2010. He enjoyed organic gardening, selling his organic produce at the local farmers market, traveling, reading, wordsmithing, avid college sports fan, and selecting winning thoroughbred horses. Born on December 9th, 1944 in Louisville to Paul and Dorothy Greenwell, he is survived by his wife, son, daughter, 7 siblings, 4 nieces, 1 nephew, 2 great-nephews, and 1 great-niece. A celebration of his life will be held 1 to 6 p.m. Saturday in Community Center of New Albin, Iowa, followed by a special mass at the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church of Lansing, Iowa at 10 a.m. on Sunday. Harry will be interred with a formal service at Calvary Cemetery in Louisville on Saturday, June 29th, 2013. Look,
I think they were probably pretty surprised.
I think this would have been crazy. He looks pretty innocuous too in most of his pictures. Somebody dug up one of his old mugshots from a long time ago, and he looks like a pretty big guy. In the mugshot, it looks like it's indicating that he's 6'5".
He looks like a tall guy, yeah.
It's kind of terrifying, and I do wonder, how do families think about this after the fact? What is the thought that you have about this person who's suddenly, whatever's going on here? I don't know what the word would be. It would be shocking to find out that this person you've known all this time was once a serial predator, maybe still was a serial predator.
Well, okay, so if we have this sort of sprawling history on him, and then it like stops in 1991.
Right.
And then we hear like, okay, the cold case, and then we just heard that he retired in 2010. And so what made him stop in 1991?
Getting married, I guess. Maybe getting married again.
No, he was married in 78.
Well, he was
Shortly
married.
thereafter.
But you're right. He was married then. She died. I don't know.
But it says he's shortly there. That's when he adopted her son and had his own child.
Yeah.
And so that makes me wonder. So there's probably the type of crime we're talking about here. I don't know. It was sexually motivated, it appears, and possibly like the robbery was just like to get pocket money or something, I guess. But he was just like really mean, right?
Yeah.
This guy was not a nice guy. And so it's clearly, I think you're right. I do think it shows him to be like 6'5", right?
Yeah, he's like 6'5", 6'6".
Okay, so he's that's really tall. And it looks like, he's basically just assaulting these women. So what motivates a middle-aged man to feel the need to go into a hotel and sexually assault and shoot? So that's a difference, right?
Right.
A lot of times assault victims are not shot, they're strangled or stabbed even, but he's shooting them. So I don't see him as having that like the killing part was not the part he was craving, motivating him.
It wasn't what he was going for. It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't the reason for. Right.
And so that was just. Who knows why he did it, right? And killing somebody with a gun is not an act of power. It was the assault that was the power dynamic he was looking for. In his last victim, his last two victims survived.
Right.
And so it is entirely possible that he didn't like killing.
He wanted the sexual assault part.
And it could have been that he could have felt like horribly guilty about it. And, he stopped killing. The reason I'm saying all that is because I find it strange that it ended in 91 as far as we're concerned here, right? I have to wonder, I don't see how like that many, I don't know that we're going to have a ton of like 90s and early 2000s evidence, DNA profiles being entered into CODIS like at this point in 2024, right? I don't know how many more are out there, right?
Yeah.
And so, is the extent of what can be matched DNA wise, is that done? I don't know. I have no idea. And I don't think anybody knows. The other thing that I wondered about was I would have, without the DNA evidence, I would have discounted the Interstate 90 and this because she was stabbed, right?
Yeah.
And so I would not have linked those together. But it sounds to me almost like there was some reason that he changed it up, right?
Yeah.
And then, his first two victims that have been linked, and he dumped those bodies. So he may have just decided he didn't want to kill them. I think that that would be like a best case scenario in my opinion, that like he just decided he didn't like the murder part of it. Now I do think that I think I've read about like all the backlog of sexual assault kits that aren't in CODIS, right?
Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit here, but it's a lot. It is a whole lot.
And so that would be different than like a murder, right? And so if he really did back up and decide, I don't want to kill them, it is possible that as the log gets cleared, the match could be made DNA wise, because at this point, that's the only thing we're really going to be able to go off of, right? That would be very interesting to find out. You've got this sexual sadist who killed two victims at least, And then he just went on to be a rapist. Like, he wasn't a murderer because of whatever reason. I'm saying because maybe he didn't like killing them, right?
Right.
That would be really weird, right? Because normally it's an escalation. And here it seems like just the way it went the other way.
Yeah, I brought him up, one, because he's sort of captured in time in a weird way. Like, he was a successful predator in his life.
He was also a successful person,
Right.
according to his obituary. So how's that work?
I'm not 100% sure. So that makes me question all of it. But so there's that. And then there's this sprawling thing that he's doing where his locations are all over the place. He's got some stabbing and some shooting. He's raping and is robbing. And then he just, like you said, one day he either doesn't get connected to the rest of his crimes, or he walks off and says, "Well, I'm done. That was my number," whatever it was.
I always think that people that are taking, especially if somebody's murdered, but like, they're stealing like a couple $100 and sexually assaulting the clerk and killing them or not killing them. I always feel like they're wanting that money for drugs. I know that's very stereotypical, but it just seems like it's got to take something like a really strong craving to take money like that.
Well, I don't have a lot else on this guy, so I would not say that's not what's happening here. And like if somebody were to dump a pile or file of like his life and victims and stuff, I would gladly cover him more in detail. I just don't understand. Like, so this guy in 2022, I got one of those timelines on him. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, so it's the FBI saying, we want to know anybody that knew him during these times. And here's where he was when we think he was, just like Israel Hughes. But I think to some degree you're right, because there is a felony drug possession charge in here from the late 90s. I wondered because we started with the guy ranting about weed and beheading his father and all of that, kind of wrapping Harry up. I wondered if he didn't discover marijuana and realize that the world was a very relaxing place.
Well, and I do see where someone could grow up in different ways. I have a tendency, and I think that this is very well illustrated in our coverage of Keys. I have a tendency to really want to give guys like this the bird because, the successful predator things just really irritate me.
I hate to say it that way. I'm just like my point is, okay, how about undetected predator? That better?
Well, no, he was a success. This guy was a successful predator. But here's my point. I feel like the DNA evidence linking him to these murders and these sexual assaults is enough to say definitively that he did it. Now, we're not anybody, right?
We're not privy to any of that, right?
I mean, we're not like this isn't him being found guilty. And so, do people like that get away with things? Because what if there was some sort of weird explanation? To me, I can't come up with anything that's going to. If you have unidentified profile at 4 crime scenes comes back to match your DNA, and this is like the universal you, any sort of connection that doesn't lead to you being the perpetrator is going to be very vivid and apparent. Because if you're showing up at all these crime scenes and you're unidentified to an extent, like, you're more than likely the person that did it. And so, is that enough? Well, it's enough for us to talk about it on a digital show, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that people that I don't feel like his family should be punished for it, right? But at the same time, I feel like like, if this were a family member of mine, I would have wished that it had been successfully adjudicated either way before they died.
Yeah. Well, his wife Julie had an interesting take on it. She spoke with the Independent, and WPTA has some articles on this. The FBI talks about him. The Independent had like a little blurb on it when it was announced that it was him. I'm pulling this quote. I'm not going to read the whole thing. This is from Sheila Flynn too. It says, "Real possibility the I-65 serial killer claimed more victims, say police and his widow." Harry Edward Greenwell was a Kentucky native who spent time in prison for robbery and worked on railroad tracks across the Midwest. He died at the age of 68 after a battle with cancer, where he shared a 3-bedroom farmhouse in Iowa with his third wife, Julie Jenkins, who had 3 biological children of her own. So he gets named on Tuesday at a multi-agency press conference as the suspect in the infamous I-65/Days End killer case. Miss Jenkins on Wednesday told the Independent that the rural Iowa farmhouse she shared with her husband of nearly 20 years had also looked out onto a highway, though she'd never had an inkling that he could have such a violent past. She says she feels pretty dazed after the naming of her husband at the press conference, which included officials from the FBI and Indiana State Police. She told the Independent that the FBI had contacted her to her disbelief several months ago, but she had no idea that such a bombshell would happen this week.
Oh, she didn't know.
No, she says, "I keep thinking about our life together. He was kind. He was caring. He did have a temper, but that was not unusual. I don't think you kill people because you're mad at them, not strangers." She said, "I don't know what to think about much of it other than I feel horrible for the families that dealt with that for so many years. And I know that there's nothing I can do except say, I'm sorry. I had no idea."
Well, I don't think she would have known anything. I don't think he was doing anything. I don't know when they got married, but
That's the third wife. His first wife died in 1978. I don't know I don't have a good timeline on him.
It is entirely possible. She thought, I believe she was saying, you don't kill strangers you don't know because you're mad at them. But a lot of times you're mad at somebody.
He has a pretty wild beard in these sketches that is not in any of his pictures. Did you notice that?
Well, yeah, because, I mean, he was definitely, he was aware of what he was doing. Like, I'm saying he'd grow his beard out, go do it. And then, so that is serial killer, right?
Yep. Oh yeah. He's a hunter. Yeah.
Without question. And, you know, he's also the type of guy. So I'm thinking he chilled out. Maybe he did just decide, like, maybe he discovered pot and was like, I'm going to chill out. Right.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking he was smug. Knowing he had gotten away with this for all these years. And that irritates me to no end. It's interesting that his wife, I personally would not say anything at all if I were to face a situation like this with anybody in my life. But, you know, she's clearly in shock. But can you imagine the FBI being like, yeah, you're going to need to come to this press conference, right? And you go and you find out the man you were married to, his DNA was found at the scene of these crimes.
I don't think I would go.
Yeah, no kidding. But I mean, I see why the FBI wouldn't tell her ahead of time. While, you know, it's not her fault, you know, it could be really, really startling. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, this was one of the most interesting tidbits, and I wanted to tack it on here. We do have one more episode where we're going to talk to Bob Cyphers next week and sort of do a wrap up of the I-70 killer. Did you have anything that you want to add about Harry here?
No, I hate it that he got away with it. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, he's linked to right now he's got 3 murders and a couple of attempted. If he were to be linked to a bunch of crimes, I would probably bring him back up and do a deeper dive into him. It was a little difficult to do given he sort of died right ahead of the time where the internet captures everything you do. And he was 68 years old, so he's sort of out of touch with the social media generation. But like, he is strangely, one of those killers that it seems like he's successful, for lack of a better word. He got away with this, and I would be interested in delving into him a little more if we could put together the materials.
Well, I would be up for that, especially if I could see a little more information. Now, granted, I certainly would never want to jump to any conclusions for somebody that there wasn't DNA evidence on, right?
Right.
But there's a lot of things here that could support some theories that I have about these different types of killers, because he didn't confess. Everything that he did with regard to the murders and the assault, for the most part, it was unadjudicated, not even a clue that he was involved until way later. But he died of cancer. And I've always wondered, like, if, whether or not you feel bad about it, if that can shorten your lifespan, right? Living with something like that.
Like it eats you, basically.
Yeah, like because, it's not super theoretical or anything, but like sometimes you internalize things and it ends up being things like acid reflux or cancer or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it's from stress. And I have a tendency to believe that killers would feel more stressed if they were remorseful and felt guilty about what they did, right? That could be wrong. Because to me, if you're like a dedicated serial killer, like you're not going to be internalizing a whole lot of that stuff, right? But I don't know that for certain. But I have sort of thoughts on, especially this situation where, this is strong evidence, and he died about 5 years before they made the finding. And then they waited, even after they matched it, they waited, another 5 years?
To try and confirm, yeah.
And so that made me wonder, like, I think that at some point in time we're going to have to do like a skip jump, because if, just a little bit sooner, and they could have prosecuted this guy.
Yeah. I read cases like this, and there's a couple things that stand out in my head. One of those is, if you go by just what they say in this timeline they give us, he was only a serial killer from the time he was 43 to the time he was 46 years old.
And if you had more information about his life, couldn't you tell if that was true or not?
That's what I mean.
Because I feel like I could. And what I would be looking for is, like, if that's about the time his second marriage fell apart.
No, it's not, because his second marriage really falls apart in the 90s after all of this. It could have been that his second marriage was terrible.
Well, I'm just saying, I feel like there's going to be something. It doesn't even have to be anything about his marriage. But like, I'm saying, if you can have an overall look at somebody's life and you could see, like, oh yeah, for those 3 years, I can see because you can see the decline, right?
Yeah.
And then you could see, like, they hit bottom, and then they either get caught or they like commit suicide, or like there's lots of ways that ends, right? But it seems like this guy hit the bottom, bounced back up, right? As far as if you're looking at, a graph of life here. Because I would say, if I'm doing a line graph of the situation, when a serial killer's killing, it's at the bottom, right?
Yeah. Right.
Okay, but according to this guy's obituary, like, it goes right back on up, right?
Yep.
And so you have to wonder about that.
Yeah, so I thought I would close out with a quote from his wife. Somebody caught her like right as the press conference and everything was going down, and they use it in the independent articles. She mentions having to tell her 17-year-old granddaughter. She said, friends and family have been suitably shocked, though she has not spoken to his extended family yet. She said, I expect that I'll reach out and discuss it with them as much as they would want. But yesterday, I just didn't have the energy. It was kind of a sucker punch when the FBI had contacted me. I thought, well, this can't be real. This can't be. But then that agent mentioned that family has a right to know. And I thought, well, absolutely they do. So I did what I could to point them in the right direction. And then I didn't hear anything else from them. And I almost forgot about it. And she said, I want the families of the victims to just know how sorry I am for what they've gone through. If there had been anything I would have known to alter the situation before this, I certainly would have done it. I don't know that they'd want to reach out to me for anything. I certainly would not be adverse to that happening. And of the avid, kind gardener she thought she'd married, she says, I guess you think you know somebody. I thought I knew him, but apparently I didn't know him very well. Thank you so much for listening today. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
All right, so I'm going to tell you guys a few things about some of the folks who are helping sponsor our show. Now, Labrati Creations sponsors our show, and you can always use the Crime XS code there. You can also just message them at Labrati Creations, and they will generally do something for the people who come from True Crime XS. They were our very first sponsor. They've done a lot for the show, and that code is CrimeXS at LabratiCreations.com. The first new advertisers that we have, and I've selected all of these guys. I've selected all of these advertisers. So the very first one is Cure. Now, I'm going to tell you guys about this, about Cure as being one of our sponsors. If you're an athlete, you know that proper hydration is key to peak performance, but plain water can be boring and sports drinks can be filled with artificial ingredients and added sugars. That's why we love Cure. It's a clean and effective way to stay hydrated and perform at your best. I use it late in the day when I switch out of caffeine mode. Specifically, when I hit the pool or I go play tennis with my wife, I use Cure to help me stay hydrated. It helps me recover after a long day. Now, you guys may not know this, but I build things. Right now, I've been building several structures on our property out here. Among those is a new podcast studio space for myself. I do a lot of that work at night and into the wee hours, and I always have some Cure with me to go into my aluminum water bottle. Hydration is not just about filling up my aluminum bottle with water. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and rehydrate quickly. Whether I'm building things or putting the podcast together or chasing these dogs that you sometimes hear in my studio up and down the trails to get them worn out, Cure Hydration is the way that I choose to go. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution, or an ORS, that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and to rehydrate quickly. The formula is made with all natural ingredients like coconut water powder and pink Himalayan salt. It's free from artificial flavors, from sweeteners, and preservatives. Pure Hydration is vegan, gluten-free, and non-GMO, making it a great option for anyone with dietary restrictions or preferences. The packets are convenient and easy to use. You just mix them with your water and you drink. They're perfect for on the go. They're perfect for travel. And anytime you need a quick and effective hydration boost, ready to combat dehydration, then you try Cure today and feel the difference for yourself. You can use code TrueCrimeXS for 20% off your order. That's TrueCrimeXS. I have a link that I'm putting in the most recent episode show notes, and True Crime Access will get you 20% off. Our second sponsor for the show today is Laird. Now, Laird has a list of things that they want me to tell you about. They have better ingredients with amazing taste and functional benefits. They have a superfood creamer crafted from the highest quality, all-natural, real food ingredients. All Laird products are sustainably sourced and thoroughly tested to ensure that you're incorporating the cleanest, finest fuel into your routine. They have all natural whole food ingredients, and they contain naturally occurring MCTs made from coconut oil. There's no artificial flavors, there's no colors or additives, and there's no sugar from highly refined corn syrup. They want me to talk about my love of coffee, but the truth is, I don't do much with coffee. But let me tell you someone who does. My wife has to have a cup of coffee every day. Now, I've fallen off recently, but one of the big things that I've done since the beginning of our relationship is she used to go and get a Starbucks every morning. I have substituted that out by always trying to make her coffee. It's not going to be every single day of time from when I met her, but for the most part, almost every day, I make her coffee. I put her creamers together and I make sure that she has a good way to start her day. So with Laird, he started experimenting with his morning ritual almost 2 decades ago. He found that when he started adding fats to his morning cup, like coconut oil, he had amazing energy throughout the rest of his day. He gradually perfected this recipe for an epic cup of fuel, and he began sharing it with his friends in the surf community. I'm an ocean guy, so I saw this item and I was like, okay, we're going to try this one out. Are you ready to feel more energized, more focused, and supported? Go to lairdsuperfood.com and add nourishing plant-based foods to fuel you from sunrise to sunset. And you can use our promo code at checkout to save 15% off your purchase today. Our offer code for this for Laird is going to be True Crime XS. Pretty much everywhere except for Labarte Creations. If you use True Crime XS, that will get you, at Laird, it'll get you 15% off. At some of the other places, they'll get you 20% off. I'm going to tell you about two more sponsors today. So the first one is, the third one is Liquid IV. So let's talk about the real reasons that you need to hydrate. Late night TV binging, back-to-back Zoom meetings, going on a walk with your friends. Everyday hydration is not just for high energy athletic endeavors. Liquid IV is the number one powdered hydration brand in America. It's now available in sugar-free. This is years in the making, but Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free uses a proprietary zero sugar hydration solution with no artificial sweeteners. It's got 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, but it's also got 8 vitamins and nutrients for everyday wellness. Liquid IV hydrates 2 times faster than water alone. Keep your daily routine exciting with 3 new flavors. They've got white peach, green grape, and lemon lime. I love all of these flavors, but I think that my favorite is probably the green grape. White peach I use as a secondary flavor, and lemon lime I leave here for my kids and my wife. Liquid IV believes that equitable access to clean and abundant water is the foundation of a healthier world. They also partner with leading organizations to fund and foster innovative solutions that help communities protect both their water and their futures. To date, Liquid IV has donated over 39 million servings in 50 plus countries around the world. You can get 20% off when you grab your Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier sugar-free or any other variant at liquidiv.com and use code TrueCrimeXS at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code TrueCrimeXS at liquidiv.com. And the last sponsor I want to tell you about is Zencastr. We are part of Zencastr's creative network. We've been using Zencastr since about midway into our first season. Meg and I experimented with a lot of different ways to put the podcast together. And the truth is, Zencastr was an integral ingredient to us being able to bring you this show. It's so easy. It's now super easy. You can record a podcast with Zencastr. You can log in using your browser and you start recording a high quality podcast right away. You can record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guest. You get to feel a sense of zen, knowing that Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you will always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. You sound your best. I mean, if you've ever worried about what you sound like, Zencastr's post-production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically removes those ums and ahs in your recordings. It removes those awkward pauses in conversation too. You can set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with a click of a button. That's how you don't hear my dogs every second of every episode. Zencaster is all in one. If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are now over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place, and you can distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code TrueCrimeXS, and you're going to get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. You can also check out the other plans they have available. I want you to have the same easy experiences that I do for all my podcasting and content needs. So Zencastr.com/pricing. The offer code is TrueCrimeXS, and it's time for you to share your story today. We are also adding New Era as a sponsor for the show. New Era Cap is a headwear and apparel brand founded in 1920 in Buffalo, New York. Now, I actually have some experience with New Era caps. My dad and I have been through multiple iterations of baseball caps through the years. We collect different styles, different eras, and now my teenager has started his own cap collection and has several new eras as the centerpieces. Our favorite teams may not be the same, but our outfits are all topped with the same new era ball caps. We love the quality and the ability to wear what the players are wearing. Not to mention, New Era is the leading headwear manufacturer with quality licensed products. You can support your favorite college or pro team in style from the official headwear provider for the MLB, NFL, and NBA. You can get a stylish accessory for your everyday ensemble and support True Crime XS. Just shop the official headwear and get 15% off when you go to neweracap.com. That's neweracap.com/truecrimexs. You can also use the code TrueCrimeXS at checkout. That's it. That's all you have to do. And that's 15% off your order using the promo code TrueCrimeXS.